They came at dawn. Not the dawn of a planet, but the dawn of a century that humans had spent in peace. A century of quiet colonization, rebuilding, and reaching out to the stars not as conquerors, but as settlers. For decades, humanity had been silent. No grand wars, no interstellar drama, just work, family, and dreams spread across dozens of worlds. Many in the galaxy took that silence as weakness. They thought humans had grown soft, that they'd forgotten what made them feared. They were wrong. The first attack came without warning. A small colony orbiting the twin suns of Helion 5 was vaporized in under an hour. Thousands of lives gone, families erased. The invaders, an alien coalition calling themselves the Threx Dominion, broadcasted a simple message across the networks. Human expansion ends here. It was a warning to others, a show of strength. But they didn't understand who they were provoking. To them, humanity was just another young species, too spread out to fight back, too sentimental to endure. They didn't know what happens when you strike a world full of families and children, a world built with human hands and guarded by human hearts. In the early hours after the attack, the news spread across the colonies. Every transmission, every relay, every soldier's outpost buzzed with disbelief. The colonies had no standing armies anymore, not like in the old wars. Peace had made them efficient, not paranoid. But when the first rescue ships arrived and found nothing but glassed soil and burning wreckage, something ancient stirred in the human collective memory. That old, quiet rage. Back on Earth, the council convened. The old generals who had long retired were called back into the light. Fleet yards that had been dormant for decades roared back to life. The industrial colonies on Mars began producing warships again, their factories glowing red against the dust storms. The younger generation didn't understand what it meant yet, but the older ones did. They remembered. They remembered the wars humanity fought before they ever left their homeworld. The wars that nearly ended them. The wars that taught them what it meant to survive. The Threx Dominion thought they'd struck a soft species. They didn't know that under all the diplomacy, all the calm words and trade agreements, humanity still carried the instincts of predators, adaptable, relentless, and terrifyingly creative. They had no idea what they'd unleashed, because humanity wasn't just another race among the stars. Humanity was the sleeping dragon, and now it had been awakened. Across the colonies, volunteers flooded recruitment centers. Engineers began converting mining vessels into gunships. Old veterans returned to teach a new generation how to fight in vacuum and fire. Civilians who had never held a weapon before learned to operate drones and defense grids. There was no command from above, no single voice shouting orders. Humanity didn't need one. The call to defend their own echoed in every human heart. The first counterstrike wasn't official. It wasn't even organized. A small fleet of cargo haulers, retrofitted with scrap cannons and railguns, appeared near a Threx forward outpost. They weren't soldiers, but miners and transporters. They shouldn't have won, yet they did. Because humans fight differently, with unpredictability, with emotion, with the refusal to quit even when logic says they should. The Dominion underestimated that. They always did. When word spread of the victory, something unstoppable began. Every colony started building, planning, fighting back. The sleeping dragon had opened its eyes. And while the Threx Dominion still saw them as scattered colonies, humanity began to unite. For the first time in generations, they were not divided by nations or worlds, but bound by one purpose: survival. In orbit above Titan, massive shipyards awakened from long sleep, pulling forgotten blueprints from the archives. Designs once considered too dangerous or expensive to build were suddenly being forged again. Ships with names like Vigilance, Retribution, and Archangel rose from the docks. Their hulls carried scars from the past, but their purpose was clear: protect the species, avenge the fallen. Meanwhile, on the edge of the Orion corridor, human scouts began gathering intelligence. They mapped the Dominion's trade routes, outposts, and supply lines. Every piece of information, every signal intercepted, was another piece of the puzzle. Humanity wasn't going to fight blind. They were going to dismantle their enemy, piece by piece, world by world, until every soul lost on Helion 5 had justice. But not everyone agreed on how far humanity should go. Among the council, debates grew heated. Some wanted total retaliation. Burn the Dominion homeworlds, make an example. Others believed vengeance would make humans no better than the monsters who started the war. Yet deep down, everyone knew the truth. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. Because once you show weakness in this galaxy, predators never stop coming. And somewhere beyond the known systems, the Dominion leaders watched the human response with growing unease. Reports came in: failed assaults, missing fleets, sabotage in their own territories. It didn't make sense. Humans weren't supposed to be this organized, this efficient, this dangerous. But they were learning fast, adapting faster. And when humans adapt, they evolve the battlefield itself. Back on the Outer Rim, the remnants of Helion 5 survivors sent one final transmission to the Council. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a plea. It was a promise. "They think they destroyed us," the message said, "but they only woke us up. For every world they burn, we will build 10 more. For every life they take, we will take back 100-fold. We are not prey. We are the dragons they should have never disturbed." That message spread faster than any official broadcast. It became a rallying cry, a symbol. The colonies began painting dragons on their ships, old Earth symbols of power and endurance. Even the children knew the saying now, "Don't wake a sleeping dragon." The Dominion had no idea how true that would become. The skies over Mars shimmered with the light of engines as new fleets launched into the void. The sound of humanity's return to war echoed through every communication channel. It wasn't the roar of anger, it was the steady, focused silence before the storm. The kind of silence that only comes before something unstoppable moves. And somewhere, far beyond the rim, a massive Dominion fleet gathered, confident, waiting, unaware that the prey they thought they'd cornered was already hunting them. The stars would soon bear witness to what humans do best: adapt, endure, and rise. Because this wasn't just a war anymore. This was a reminder to every species watching: humanity doesn't start fights. But when you bring war to their doorstep, when you threaten their people and destroy their homes, they don't retreat. They become something else. The sleeping dragons were awake now, and the galaxy was about to remember why they should have stayed asleep. As the first human warships broke through the darkness of space, engines burning brighter than ever, the message repeated once more across every channel, in every language. "You attacked human colonies? Congratulations. You just stirred the sleeping dragons." And then, the signal went silent, right before the first human fleet vanished into the black. In the days that followed, the galaxy felt different. Trade routes that once bustled with civilian transports now carried warships. Communications that used to bring news of festivals and harvests now whispered of mobilization and vengeance. Humanity, once content with quiet progress, had shifted. Something deep had changed. It wasn't just the destruction of Helion 5. It was the realization that peace had made them forget what they were capable of. For years, humans had believed the stars were a place for cooperation and discovery. Now, they were reminded that survival out here meant being ready to fight for every inch of it. On Earth, factories that had once built colony shuttles began producing weapons again. The orbital shipyards surrounding Luna glowed like twin halos in the darkness, welding steel and dreams together. The sight of the first completed dreadnought drifting from its dock drew silent awe across the feeds, a massive silhouette carrying the old human flag across its hull. It wasn't a symbol of aggression, but of unity. Each rivet, each layer of armor, told a story of people who refused to fade away quietly. Among those watching from the observation decks was a young officer who had grown up after the wars. He had never seen combat. To him, war had always been history, something that belonged in museums and old soldiers' stories. But as he stared out at the fleet forming before him, he felt the same pull that millions of others were feeling. It wasn't hate driving them. It was duty. The quiet belief that if no one stood up now, there might not be anyone left to stand later. Back on the colonies, families prepared differently. Some sent loved ones to join the defense fleets. Others turned their homes into supply stations or medical hubs. Humanity didn't need orders to act, and it was instinct. When one of their own was threatened, the rest gathered without hesitation. Old rivalries between colonies dissolved overnight. Mars engineers shared ship schematics with Europa miners. Earth's outdated AI systems were reprogrammed and upgraded by frontier tech teams. It was the kind of unity no council could ever enforce, born not from politics, but from shared loss. Far away, deep in the Orion corridor, Dominion commanders studied the reports with confusion. Their analysts couldn't understand how a species with no centralized fleet, no active military structure, could respond this fast. The Dominion had fought countless species before, disciplined, predictable, easy to crush. But humanity was different. They moved without pattern, without warning. They turned transport ships into war machines, orbital farms into defense grids. The Dominion's arrogance had blinded them. They didn't realize that humans had been preparing for war long before they even knew aliens existed. Every human settlement, no matter how peaceful, had always carried backup systems, contingency plans, and emergency drills. They didn't trust the universe to be kind. In one of the Dominion's outposts, a strategist reviewed intercepted human transmissions. One message caught his attention. It wasn't coded, not hidden, a deliberate broadcast repeating across the void. "You attacked human colonies. You will learn what that means." The words were simple, but there was something unsettling about them. Not boastful, not emotional, just certain. Meanwhile, deep in the asteroid fields of the Vega system, a hidden human base operated in silence. It was one of the first places where the new fleet gathered for training. Inside its dark hangars, pilots practiced maneuvers that had never been tested in real combat. Engineers worked tirelessly to merge old Earth technology with salvaged alien components. Every hour mattered. Every small victory brought them closer to what was coming. They didn't know when the next Dominion strike would fall, only that it was inevitable. One night, during a briefing, an old commander addressed the gathered crews. His voice was steady, heavy with experience. "We're not just fighting for the colonies," he said. "We're fighting for the right to exist in this galaxy without kneeling to anyone. They think we're scattered. They think we'll break. Let's make sure they remember this moment, the moment humanity stopped running." The room was silent, filled with faces young and old. Some were born on Earth, others on frozen moons or orbital stations. But in that silence, they were all the same. Human. Rumors began to spread of the first human counter fleets forming near the rim systems. No official announcements, no parades, just sudden disappearances of entire squadrons, their transponders going dark. Dominion scouts reported losing contact with outposts and convoys. At first, they assumed it was malfunction or internal sabotage. But soon, debris fields began to appear, silent reminders that the humans were not just preparing anymore. They were already striking back. Still, no one knew who was leading these attacks. The Council had never claimed responsibility. There were whispers of rogue fleets, independent commanders taking the fight into their own hands. To outsiders, it looked chaotic. To humans, it was natural. Each fleet acted with autonomy, bound not by rank but by purpose. They didn't need centralized command. Their unity came from something stronger, shared resolve. Yet even as the humans began to push back, there was an undercurrent of fear. Not for themselves, but for what they might become. Some worried that by fighting monsters, they might start to mirror them. Philosophers and journalists questioned if humanity's old instincts, the ones buried for so long, could be controlled once unleashed. But no one could stop what was already in motion. Across the stars, colonies began broadcasting a single emblem, a dragon coiled around a burning star. It appeared on ship hulls, banners, and even communication networks. The image carried a message without words, that humanity had awakened, and that anyone watching should think twice before testing them again. The Dominion, realizing their mistake too late, began forming alliances with other species. They spread propaganda, claiming humanity was dangerous and unpredictable. And in a way, they were right. Humanity was unpredictable, not because of hatred, but because of their refusal to surrender. Amid all the preparations, strange reports began surfacing. Dominion listening posts detected unusual energy signatures near their borders, human ships moving faster than expected, vanishing into slip space without known coordinates. Some believed the humans had discovered something new, something the rest of the galaxy didn't yet understand. Others whispered that humanity's scientists had found ways to manipulate gravity itself, turning the void into a weapon. On one of the deep space communication relays, a lone transmission was intercepted by Dominion analysts. It was human in origin, short and distorted, but clear enough to send chills down every spine that heard it. "We warned you. You thought we were gone, but we're already here." The Dominion quickly dismissed it as a bluff. But in the following weeks, their border stations began to vanish. Not destroyed, just gone. No wreckage, no survivors, only silence. Something was moving through the darkness, and no one could track it. Back in the Sol system, the Council watched all of this unfold with grim focus. They knew the war was far from over. The Dominion still had numbers, resources, and allies. But humans had something far more dangerous: experience. They had lost everything before and rebuilt from ashes. They had learned to turn defeat into strength. In the cold dark between stars, fleets moved like shadows, preparing for what was coming. Humanity was still organizing, still learning, still growing. But the feeling across every world was the same: anticipation. The calm before the storm. The Dominion might have thought they could predict human behavior. They couldn't, because humans don't fight for conquest. They fight for home, and when home is threatened, there's no limit to what they'll do to protect it. Somewhere in the void, deep beyond known space, the first wave of the human fleet gathered. Engines low, weapons charged, crews silent. They were waiting for the signal, the moment that would begin the real war. And when that signal came, it wouldn't be announced. It would be felt. Across every Dominion sensor, across every corner of the galaxy, humanity's return to the battlefield would not begin with noise, but with silence. The kind that comes right before fire, because the dragons weren't just awake anymore. They were spreading their wings. And the galaxy hadn't yet realized that what they had called weakness was just patience. The first strikes came quietly, like whispers in the dark. Dominion fleets stationed at the edge of human-controlled space began disappearing one by one. At first, the Dominion blamed faulty systems or local uprisings. But when wreckage started showing up drifting near uncharted asteroid belts, the truth became impossible to ignore. Humanity had begun its counterattack. No declaration, no warning, just precise, ruthless efficiency. Each strike was different. Sometimes entire Dominion supply convoys went missing without leaving a trace. Other times, orbital stations were found intact but completely abandoned, their systems hacked, their crews vanished. What frightened the Dominion most wasn't the destruction itself. It was that they couldn't predict it. Human tactics weren't following any pattern known to galactic warfare. They didn't fight for territory. They didn't move in straight lines or engage in full-scale assaults. They appeared where they shouldn't have been able to, struck like ghosts, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Inside the Dominion Command Council, panic started to grow. The Threx leadership had expected a quick, decisive campaign. Wipe out a few colonies, enforce dominance, move on. Now, their once confident admirals were losing fleets to what they called the human anomaly. They had the numbers, the ships, the firepower. But none of it mattered when your enemy refused to fight the way you understood. Meanwhile, across human space there was still uncertainty. The colonies had united in spirit, but not every leader agreed on how far they should go. Some argued for total war, to push into Dominion space and dismantle them completely. Others wanted to secure the borders and protect human systems without escalating further. The Council debated endlessly, but out in the field, the fleets weren't waiting for orders anymore. Among the officers commanding these rogue human fleets was a captain who had lost his entire family on Helion 5. He had no interest in politics or diplomacy. His crew followed him not because of rank, but because they believed in his mission to make sure no one would ever harm humanity again. His ship, a heavily modified carrier originally built for exploration, became one of the most feared vessels in human space. They called it the Revenant. It moved like a shadow, striking hard and disappearing before anyone could track it. Dominion commanders whispered about it in fear, calling it the Ship of Ghosts. But even within humanity's growing strength, there were cracks. Supply chains were stretched thin. Some colonies were running out of resources. The rapid militarization that had united them also began to strain their fragile economies. Civilians who had once volunteered now found themselves caught in the middle of a war that seemed endless. Rumors spread that the Dominion wasn't the only enemy out there, that other alien factions were watching, waiting to see who would win before choosing sides. On Mars, the old industrial hubs were working non-stop, their skies glowing red with furnace light. Engineers and technicians slept beside their machines, producing ships faster than ever before. Yet even they knew the cost. Every warship built meant another colony left with fewer supplies. Every missile launched was metal that could have built homes. The war was changing everyone, turning workers into soldiers and scientists into strategists. The quiet optimism that had once fueled human expansion was fading into something colder: determination. In the outer systems, human scouts discovered something that changed the balance again. While surveying a debris field, they found fragments of a Dominion ship unlike any seen before, equipped with new weapons and armor that suggested the enemy was adapting just as quickly. It was a grim reminder that the Dominion wasn't going to collapse easily. They were learning too. The moment humans had proven they were a real threat, the Dominion had started building something new, something bigger. Back in Dominion space, the war was also reshaping them. Fear of humanity spread like wildfire. The Threx citizens had once seen humans as primitive, emotional, impulsive, fragile. Now they whispered stories of invisible fleets and unstoppable soldiers. Propaganda tried to paint humans as monsters, but the more the Dominion spoke of them, the more real the fear became. Entire colonies began reinforcing themselves, building planetary shields and underground bunkers. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion realized it wasn't untouchable, yet humanity wasn't united in vengeance alone. There were those who wanted to understand the enemy. Scientists and diplomats worked quietly in the background, gathering intercepted Dominion data, studying their biology, their psychology, their history. One team on Europa made a breakthrough. They discovered that the Threx Dominion wasn't truly united. It was a coalition of rival species under one flag, held together by fear and hierarchy. If humanity could exploit those cracks, turn those fears inward, they might not need to win through sheer force. That idea divided the council even more. Some saw it as the key to ending the war faster. Others saw it as manipulation no better than the Dominion's own cruelty. But while politicians argued, the soldiers out there kept fighting. They didn't have the luxury of philosophy, only survival. In the Vega system, the Revenant and its fleet intercepted a Dominion convoy carrying new weapons. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes, but the data they recovered revealed something shocking. The Dominion was building a massive supercarrier, a mobile fortress capable of wiping out entire colonies at once. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a message. The Dominion wanted to end the war with a single, overwhelming strike, to remind the galaxy who ruled it. When news of the supercarrier reached the Council, panic rippled across human space. They didn't have the technology to match something that size. But they did have something else: adaptability. Engineers began reworking old terraforming drives into makeshift weapons, converting mining lasers into rail cannons. Humanity had always been at its most dangerous when cornered, and this was no exception. As preparations began, strange things started happening near the front lines. Dominion ships were reporting phantom signals, false readings of human fleets where there were none, radar interference that seemed impossible. Some thought it was human hacking. Others believed humanity had found a way to use the void itself as cover. Either way, the Dominion was growing paranoid. Fleets were overextended, wasting fuel, chasing shadows. On one distant world near the galactic rim, a young technician watched as the first wave of human reinforcements arrived, ships scarred, patched, yet unbroken. When the docking clamps locked and the hatches opened, she saw something in their faces that unsettled her. It wasn't rage. It wasn't fear. It was focus, the look of people who had decided they were going to win, no matter the cost. Back on Earth, the leaders debated once more. Could they still claim to be fighting for peace when so much of their effort had turned to destruction? Could they still call themselves explorers when their ships now bore more guns than sensors? The questions lingered unanswered. But for most humans scattered across the stars, it didn't matter anymore. The war had already defined them, and somewhere in the vast cold of space, beyond human and Dominion scanners alike, something ancient was watching. Other civilizations, silent observers, studied the conflict. They had seen countless wars before, but never one that moved like this. Never one where a species turned its pain into strategy, its loss into momentum. Some were afraid. Others were curious. Humanity's rise was beginning to reshape more than just the war. It was shifting the balance of the galaxy itself. The Dominion supercarrier was nearing completion. Humanity's fleets were closing in. Every side was preparing for a confrontation that would decide far more than just victory or defeat. It would decide who truly belonged among the stars. But deep within the heart of the war, where ships drifted between wreckage and silence, a single transmission echoed through encrypted channels, short, human, and full of quiet resolve. They thought we were asleep. Let's show them what it means to wake the dragons. And with that, the final preparations began. The storm was no longer coming. It was already here, waiting to be unleashed. The galaxy was holding its breath. Every transmission, every sensor ping, every flicker on a radar screen carried the weight of what was coming. Humanity's fleets had scattered across the stars, but now they were converging. Thousands of ships moving in silence, their engines dimmed to avoid detection. They were gathering for what would be their largest operation yet, the strike against the Dominion's new supercarrier. It was more than a ship. It was a symbol of control, the Dominion's final statement that they still ruled the stars. But humanity had other plans. In the dark void beyond the Vega corridor, the human armada drifted just beyond sensor range. Ships of every shape and size filled the expanse, from massive dreadnoughts forged in Martian shipyards to old mining freighters refitted into makeshift destroyers. They floated in formation, lights off, silent except for the hum of reactor cores and the quiet breathing of the crews inside. Every man and woman aboard knew the risks. None expected to come back unchanged, if they came back at all. The command vessel at the heart of the fleet was surrounded by constant communication chatter, encrypted signals, last-minute course corrections, silent coordination across hundreds of systems. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Officers studied the holographic projection of the Dominion supercarrier, a structure the size of a small moon, bristling with weapon arrays and shield towers. Its core was powered by a reactor unlike anything humans had seen before. If it reached human space, it could annihilate entire colonies in a single pass. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. This battle would decide everything. If they failed here, there wouldn't be a second chance. The Dominion would crush humanity's scattered defenses and burn every world that stood in their way. But if they succeeded, the balance of power in the galaxy would change forever. On board the Revenant, the crew worked quietly. The captain stood at the viewport, staring into the darkness. His reflection was faint, ghost-like, surrounded by the stars. "Do they know what they're about to face?" his first officer asked softly. He shook his head. "No one ever does." "But they'll fight anyway." He turned back to the controls. "That's what we do." Across the fleet, preparations continued. Drones moved between ships, transferring ammunition, energy cells, and repair supplies. Medics stocked the infirmaries, though most of them knew there would be little time for treatment once the fighting started. Engineers made last-minute checks on the reactors. The hum of activity was constant, yet eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. At the same time, deep in Dominion space, the supercarrier stirred to life. Its massive engines flared, sending waves of energy rippling through the void. Commanders aboard the vessel believed victory was certain. They had tracked fragments of the human fleet, but never the whole picture. To them, this was going to be a final demonstration. Overwhelming power, crushing an inferior enemy. The Threx Dominion had always relied on fear to control others, and this was their greatest display of it yet. But as the carrier moved closer to the frontier systems, its long-range sensors began detecting anomalies. Faint distortions, ghost signatures, impossible readings. Sensor interference, one technician said nervously. Probably a spatial anomaly, but deep down the crew knew better. Somewhere out there, unseen, the humans were waiting. Human intelligence networks had spent weeks studying the Dominion's new weapon systems. They knew that direct confrontation was suicide. The only way to destroy the supercarrier was from within, a surgical strike into its reactor core. The plan was risky, almost impossible. But humanity had built its survival on impossible odds before. A small task force led by the Revenant would infiltrate the Dominion formation while the rest of the fleet drew their attention. It would be chaos, but that chaos was the plan. When the signal came through the fleet channels, a simple encrypted phrase, "The dragons are in motion," every ship came alive. Engines ignited, shields powered up. Thousands of vessels aligned their trajectories toward the heart of Dominion space. There were no speeches, no dramatic farewells, just quiet determination. Humanity wasn't fighting for glory. They were fighting for existence. The Dominion detected the first wave within minutes, a swarm of decoy ships emerging from the darkness. Alarms blared across their command decks as human signatures multiplied on their scanners. "Multiple incursions! Unknown formation pattern!" shouted one officer. The Dominion commander barked orders, deploying fighter wings and activating defensive grids. But what they didn't know was that half of those signals were fake, projections created by human stealth tech. While the Dominion redirected its forces, the Revenant and its escort ships slipped through the shadows, flying beneath the detection threshold. The plan depended on precision and timing. One mistake, one miscalculation, and the entire infiltration would fail. The captain's hands were steady as he guided the ship through the drifting debris field. "Keep the engines low," he ordered. "We're ghosts until I say otherwise." Outside, the main battle erupted. Human and Dominion ships clashed in flashes of light that tore across the stars. Missiles streaked through space, energy beams cut through armor, and the blackness was filled with bursts of fire. The human fleet fought not with superior numbers, but with unpredictability. Smaller ships darted between the larger Dominion vessels, weaving patterns that broke their formation apart. Every second the Dominion spent trying to regroup brought the Revenant closer to its target. The infiltration team watched the battle unfold from their screens, each explosion reflected in their eyes. They knew every one of those lights represented lives, friends, comrades, family, but none of them hesitated. The mission came first. Humanity's survival depended on it. As they neared the supercarrier, its massive structure filled the viewport, an endless wall of black metal and glowing weapon ports. "There," the pilot whispered, pointing at a narrow docking bay on the underside. "That's our way in." The ship's engines flared briefly as it accelerated toward the target. Inside the Dominion flagship, alarms began to sound again. "Unauthorized vessel detected," a voice shouted. "Sector 12 breach," the Dominion commander snarled. "Destroy it!" But before the order could even finish echoing, the Revenant launched its payload, a swarm of EMP drones that detonated simultaneously, blinding the carrier's sensors. In that brief moment of chaos, the human infiltration team made it inside. The team moved quickly through the dimly lit corridors, their suits sealed, their movements precise. Every step was a risk. One wrong turn and they'd be overwhelmed. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. Many had been miners, engineers, and technicians before the war. But they had become something more, survivors shaped by necessity. Back outside, the main battle was turning into a storm. Both sides were taking heavy losses. Human fleets pushed forward using asteroid fields and debris as cover. The Dominion supercarrier unleashed wave after wave of plasma fire, tearing through ships with brutal force. Yet the humans didn't retreat. They held the line, even as the stars burned around them. On the Dominion bridge, the commander's confidence was beginning to crack. "How are they doing this?" he hissed. "They shouldn't have this many ships left." One of his officers turned, trembling. "Sir, they're not retreating. They're surrounding us." Infiltrating the core, the human team finally reached the central reactor chamber, a massive sphere of energy pulsing with a low, rhythmic hum. The lead engineer stared at it, awestruck and terrified. "We can overload it," she said softly. "But once it starts, there's no stopping it." The captain's voice came over comms. "Do it, we're out of time." Above them, the Revenant was under heavy fire. Dominion cruisers had locked onto its position, surrounding it from all sides. The captain's voice was calm, even as the ship's hull began to crack. "We hold until they're clear," he said. "No one leaves until the job's done." The engineer set the charges, her hands trembling. 30 seconds, she whispered. The chamber's glow began to intensify, the energy core pulsing faster and faster. Somewhere deep within the ship, warning sirens blared as the Dominion realized what was happening. In the distance, human ships began pulling back, trying to escape the blast radius. But the Dominion refused to let them go. The sky was alive with fire, ships colliding, engines flaring, shields breaking. And in the heart of it all, the Revenant stood its ground, protecting the infiltration team's only exit. On every human channel, static filled the air. And then one last transmission cut through the chaos. Mission complete. "Get them home!" The reactor's glow brightened until it was blinding, filling the corridors with light. The humans ran, the alarms screamed, and the stars outside burned red. The Dominion fleet began to scatter, realizing too late what was coming. And then, for one brief, suspended moment, everything was silent. The kind of silence that happens right before the universe changes. Forever. The light from the supercarrier's explosion spread across, the void like a sunrise in the darkness. A brilliant, blinding wave that rippled through space. For a moment, it felt like the war had ended right there. The massive Dominion flagship, their symbol of power, was gone. The human fleet watched in silence as the shockwave faded, leaving behind only scattered debris and the faint glow of distant stars. No one cheered. No one spoke. They simply stared. Because victories in this war never felt like triumph, only survival. The transmission from the Revenant cut off right after the detonation. No one knew if the crew had made it out. Commanders tried to hail them, but the only response was static. The infiltration team's last signal confirmed the mission's success, but nothing else. For hours, the fleet held position, waiting for any sign of their lost ships. When none came, the silence grew heavier. It was a hard truth they all knew. Some dragons didn't come back from the fire they breathed. Back on Earth, news of the victory spread fast. The destruction of the Dominion supercarrier sent shock waves through the galaxy. For the first time, other alien species began reaching out to humanity, not as enemies but as equals, and in some cases, as potential allies. The Dominion's aura of invincibility had cracked. But what no one realized yet was that the explosion had done more than destroy a ship. It had torn open something far greater. Weeks after the battle, strange readings began to appear along the edges of human space. Distortions in gravity, communications blackouts, ships going missing near the debris field where the supercarrier had been destroyed. At first, scientists thought it was residual energy from the reactor overload. But as the distortions grew stronger and spread across multiple systems, they started to suspect something else, something no one wanted to admit. On one of the outer listening stations orbiting a barren moon, a technician was monitoring long-range signals when he picked up an anomaly. It wasn't Dominion traffic. It wasn't human either. It was something deeper, older. The signal pulsed in irregular intervals like a heartbeat buried beneath layers of static. When the team tried to decode it, the entire system crashed, wiping their instruments clean. Before the power shut down completely, one message flickered across the display in ancient human text. Words that hadn't been written in thousands of years. "We heard your war." No one could explain it. The scientists argued it was an echo, some kind of energy feedback caused by the supercarrier's destruction. But others weren't convinced. A few of the older officers who had fought in the early colony wars recognized the fear behind that signal. It wasn't a warning. It was an awakening. In the following weeks, more reports surfaced. Dominion patrols searching for survivors near the wreckage vanished without a trace. Human scout ships sent to investigate didn't return. Then, one night, a lone cargo freighter drifted back into human territory, its hull scarred, its crew gone. The black box recorded only fragments, flashes of strange vessels appearing from the distortion, silent and cold with no identifiable markings. Whatever they weren't Dominion. The Council reconvened immediately. Some believed it was a Dominion trick, a new kind of weapon or stealth fleet. Others feared it was something far worse, something the Dominion had accidentally unleashed. The explosion may have torn a hole through more than just space, one physicist said quietly. It might have woken up something that was never meant to wake. Across Dominion space, chaos deepened. Their leadership fractured after the loss of the supercarrier. Several species within their alliance began to rebel, sensing weakness. Civil wars erupted in their core worlds, and while humanity watched, waiting to see if their enemy would finally collapse, the strange anomalies kept spreading, this time into Dominion territory too. Systems blinked out. Entire communication grids went silent. Something was moving through the dark. In one intercepted Dominion transmission, a terrified commander could be heard shouting before the feed cut out, "It's not the humans!" "It's not," the message ended in static. For a time, humanity tried to believe the disturbances were contained. But soon the signs became impossible to ignore. Civilian transports disappeared in safe zones. Colonies lost contact with their orbiting satellites. Even the stars themselves seemed to flicker in certain regions, as if light itself was being bent around something massive, unseen. Then, deep within the ruins of the Dominion's supercarrier, a human salvage crew made a discovery that changed everything. Among the wreckage, buried beneath the twisted metal, they found fragments of technology that didn't belong to either side. The material was impossibly old, predating known galactic civilizations. The engineers studying it reported energy readings far beyond human understanding, pulsing like a living thing. When they tried to transport a fragment back to their ship, every system on board shut down. The lights flickered, the engines died, and in the silence, one of the crew heard a voice through the comms, faint, but unmistakably human. "You shouldn't have come back here. The ship never returned." Word spread fast. The scientific community demanded answers. Was this a weapon? A remnant of an ancient species? Some believed it was a warning system, something buried long ago and triggered by the massive energy release from the supercarrier's destruction. Others whispered about old myths from Earth's archives, stories of precursors who shaped the stars long before humanity ever reached them. The Council tried to contain the panic, but fear was spreading faster than control. Humanity had survived war with the Dominion, but now it faced something it didn't understand, something that didn't negotiate or retaliate, something that simply watched. Meanwhile, in the outer colonies, strange lights began appearing in the skies. Miners on the edge of known space reported seeing structures in orbit that weren't on any charts, massive silent constructs drifting slowly closer each day. Some colonies began evacuating without orders, their leaders unwilling to take chances. Among the survivors of the Revenant's crew, a few had managed to escape before the explosion, rescued by nearby vessels. They were debriefed for weeks, questioned about what they had seen. Most remembered only fragments, flashes of white light, the feeling of falling through something that wasn't space, and the sound of distant whispers. One of them, barely conscious, said something that sent chills through the room. It wasn't just the ship that broke apart. Something broke through. The Dominion, battered but not destroyed, sent a message to humanity for the first time since the war began. It wasn't a threat, it was a plea. "Whatever you unleashed," their envoy said, "it's coming for all of us." The message sparked outrage across the colonies. Some refused to believe it, calling it propaganda. Others, especially the veterans who had seen too much, recognized the fear in the Dominion's voice. It was real. Human fleets began to regroup, not for war this time, but for defense. Sensors across the border systems picked up increasing disturbances. The distortions were now appearing in patterns, almost like they were mapping the stars. Ships sent to monitor them vanished without transmitting anything back. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the anomalies stopped moving. The galaxy fell into an eerie stillness. For days, there was nothing. No signals, no interference, just quiet. It felt like the calm after a storm, until the first image came through. A deep space probe drifting near one of the distortion zones managed to capture a single frame before it was destroyed. The image showed something vast emerging from the dark. Not a fleet, not a weapon, but a structure larger than any planet, its surface marked with symbols that no species could decipher. Back on Earth, when the data reached the Council, no one spoke for a long time. The realization came slowly, painfully. The war with the Dominion had been only the beginning. Humanity hadn't just defeated an empire, they had drawn the attention of something far older, something that had been waiting in the shadows of the galaxy long before either species existed, and somewhere out there, beyond the reach of any signal, those ancient eyes turned toward human space. The stars flickered again, not from distance or distortion, but as if something immense had started to move between them. The Dominion fleets fell silent. Human outposts shut down communication. Across every world, from Earth to the farthest colonies, the same unspoken thought spread like a chill through the air. They had awakened something far worse than war. And now the dragons weren't the only ones awake. The galaxy trembled under a silence so vast it almost felt alive. Every ship, every outpost, every colony waited for something to happen, for a sign, a sound, anything. But when it came, it wasn't from the Dominion or from the strange anomalies in the stars. It came from Earth. A transmission went out across all human frequencies, encoded in an old Earth language, a security code from the earliest days of interstellar travel. It hadn't been used in centuries, and yet it carried a message that froze every heart that heard it. They're here. Within moments, deep space sensors lit up. Thousands of readings appeared simultaneously across the galactic rim. The distortions were no longer random. They formed a pattern, a vast circular shape expanding outward like a ripple through water. Humanity's fleet scrambled to respond, deploying ships to defensive positions, while Dominion forces, scattered and weakened, struggled to do the same. In orbit above the colony world of Luma 9, the largest human fleet ever assembled came together. Over 300 warships, dozens of carriers, and thousands of support vessels. The flagship, the Horizon, took point. Its commander, known for her calm even in the face of annihilation, stared at the tactical display as the incoming signatures multiplied. "It's not a fleet," one of the analysts whispered. "It's a formation." And then, from the edge of the void, they appeared. The first of the entities emerged from the distortion. Massive constructs shaped like elongated wings, their surfaces shifting like liquid metal reflecting stars that weren't even there. They didn't communicate, didn't broadcast, didn't even move in a way ships should. They just drifted forward, silent and unyielding, as if studying everything before them. Humanity's weapon systems locked on instinctively, but no one fired. For a few seconds, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Then the Dominion broke the silence. A panicked commander launched a full barrage at the nearest structure. Plasma bolts, torpedoes, everything they had. The explosion was bright enough to light up the fleet's sensors, but when the light faded, the structure remained untouched. The energy didn't just dissipate, it was absorbed. The surface shimmered for a moment, and then a single pulse of light flashed back. It wasn't a weapon. It was communication. On every ship, systems went haywire. Screens flickered, lights dimmed, and a deep, resonant sound filled the comms, like a heartbeat that wasn't meant to be heard. It carried through every hull, every frequency, as if the entire galaxy was resonating to the same rhythm. And then the sound stopped. The entities began to move. They didn't attack in the traditional sense. They simply passed through ships, cutting through matter like fog, disassembling metal and energy alike into glowing fragments. The Dominion fleets were the first to fall, their ships torn apart by invisible forces. Human vessels fought desperately to hold formation, firing everything they had. For every shot, the entities adapted, bending space around themselves, learning with terrifying speed. On the horizon, engineers worked frantically to decode the signals the entities emitted. They weren't random. They followed a pattern that matched the energy readings from the destroyed supercarrier. Whatever had been unleashed in that explosion wasn't just an ancient technology, it was intelligent, alive, and now awake. One of the researchers suddenly made a connection. It's reacting to energy signatures, not to us, but to what we're using. The weapons, the engines, everything. She looked up, realization dawning. It's feeding on it. The commander gave a single order. Shut everything down. One by one, the ships powered down. Lights faded, engines went silent, and human space went dark. The entities slowed, their movement hesitant. They floated among the disabled ships, their glow dimming as if confused. For the first time, they stopped advancing. Across the Dominion remnants, panic turned to chaos. They refused to comply, continuing to fire wildly, and one by one their ships vanished, dissolved into light. It became clear to everyone watching that the only way to survive was to become silent. In the cold dark, humanity held its breath. For hours, no one moved. The entities drifted closer to the horizon, hovering so near that their presence filled every viewport. The commander stood at the front of the bridge, watching as the massive construct's surface rippled like a living ocean. And then, for the first time, it spoke, not through words, but through a wave of thought that filled every human mind simultaneously. It wasn't angry. It wasn't vengeful. It was curious. The message was simple, almost childlike. You call yourselves awake. We remember sleep. The image that followed burned into everyone's memory. Flashes of ancient civilizations rising and falling, galaxies forming and fading, and among them, humanity standing defiant, small but unbroken. The entities had been here before. They had watched life evolve, destroy, and rebuild. They had slept through eons, waiting to see which species would awaken the stars again. And now it seemed humans had done it. But there was something else beneath the message, a warning. The energy released by the supercarrier's destruction had disrupted their long slumber, awakening not just these beings, but others scattered across the void. What had come so far was only a fraction of what was still out there. Suddenly, the entities began to shift again, their forms breaking apart into thousands of fragments. Each fragment streaked away into deep space, faster than any known drive could track. In their wake, they left silence, and a single energy pulse directed toward Earth. It wasn't an attack. It was a signal. On Earth, sensors deep beneath the crust detected an answering pulse, faint but unmistakable. Humanity's scientists realized with horror that the signal didn't come from space. It came from within the planet itself. Something had been buried there long before humans ever walked on it. The twist no one saw coming was simple and devastating. Humanity hadn't just awakened something alien. They had reawakened something connected to themselves. Deep scans revealed ancient structures buried miles beneath the surface, matching the same patterns found on the alien constructs. Humanity had always believed they were newcomers to the galaxy, explorers of a universe not their own. But this discovery suggested something else entirely, that they were part of the same cycle the entities had spoken of. Perhaps humanity wasn't just another young race. Perhaps they were descendants of something that had once ruled the stars. The commander of the Horizon received the final transmission from Earth before the signal cut out. The voice was calm but filled with awe. We've found it. The core is waking up. As the stars above flickered once more, every human ship received a single coded message, one that no one had seen in thousands of years. It carried the same phrase that had first come through the distortions. We heard your war. Only this time, it was followed by another line. Now, hear ours. The fleet watched as the planet below glowed softly, lines of light spreading across continents like veins. For a moment, fear turned into something else, wonder. Humanity had thought they were alone, that they had stumbled into a war they barely survived. But now, as the light of Earth reached into the darkness, it became clear that they had only rediscovered what they truly were. The Dominion's empire was gone. The entities had vanished back into the void, and humanity stood at the center of it all. No longer prey, no longer just dragons awakened by war, but the heirs of something far greater. As the horizon turned toward the glowing planet, the commander whispered softly, "Maybe we didn't wake them. Maybe they woke us." And somewhere, in the deep silence between the stars, the heartbeat began again, steady, powerful, human. The ground trembled across Earth, as the ancient lights spread through its crust like living veins, glowing brighter with every pulse. From orbit, it looked as if the entire planet was waking up, its oceans shimmering, its atmosphere alive with streaks of golden light. Every human watching, from the war-torn colonies to the battered fleets in orbit, knew something irreversible had begun. Scientists shouted over each other, trying to interpret the readings, but the data made no sense. The energy signature wasn't destructive. It was synchronized, a rhythm perfectly matching the pulses from the distant entities that had vanished moments ago. On the horizon, the crew watched the data feed in silence. No one dared to move or speak as the commander stood at the center of the bridge, eyes fixed on the holographic projection of Earth. "What are we looking at?" she finally asked, her voice low. The lead scientist hesitated, then replied, "It's not just energy, it's memory." The words hung in the air. Memory. That was what the patterns were, not random signals, but encoded histories. The light pulsing through Earth's crust was transmitting information, vast amounts of it, reaching deep into the planet's mantle and radiating outward into space. It was as if the planet itself had become a transmitter, communicating with the beings humanity had accidentally awakened, and then the first image appeared across every human screen. Across every ship, a projection began to form, not through any known signal, but directly into the neural links of those watching. It wasn't an attack. It was a vision. They saw a galaxy long before their time, worlds connected by shimmering gateways, civilizations thriving under a single banner. At the center of it all was Earth, not as the young blue world they knew, but as the heart of an ancient network. Humanity hadn't just been born on Earth, it had returned to it. The entities were not gods or invaders. They were guardians, machines and minds created by a civilization that predated all known species. When that ancient humanity reached its peak, they had built these entities to sleep, to protect the balance of the galaxy when their creators were gone. But something had gone wrong. The ancient ones vanished, leaving only traces, and now, millennia later, their descendants had unknowingly triggered the same guardians they left behind. The revelation swept through humanity like fire. Every commander, every soldier, every civilian now understood what had been awakened. The war with the Dominion had been a spark, but the storm had always been waiting. The entities hadn't come to destroy. They had come to test. The commander clenched her jaw as the realization settled in. They were waiting for us to remember who we were, but the test wasn't over. As the light from Earth reached its peak, the atmosphere shimmered. In orbit, massive energy readings formed above the planet, 12 beams of light rising into space, converging at a single point. From that convergence, a massive structure began to form, pieced together from the fragments of energy left behind by the entities. It wasn't a weapon, it was a gate. On the tactical feed, analysts confirmed the impossible. The gate was opening a wormhole, but not to any known region of the galaxy. The destination was blank. No coordinates, no stars, just void. The scientists argued that it could be a trap or a recall signal from the entities. But deep down, everyone knew this was the culmination of everything. And then the Dominion responded. What little remained of their forces gathered near the human fleet. The once proud empire, broken and desperate, sent a final transmission. Their leader, weary, humbled, appeared on the bridge's display. "We thought you were conquerors," he said. "We were wrong. You are something older, something we were never meant to fight." He looked past the camera, as if speaking not to the humans, but to the light beyond them. "Whatever you do now, do it for all of us." Then, in an act no one expected, the Dominion ships positioned themselves around the gate, forming a defensive perimeter. For the first time in recorded history, humans and Dominion fought together, not as enemies, but as survivors standing before something beyond comprehension. The gate pulsed again. A deep hum echoed through space, shaking every ship. And from within that swirling void, a voice filled their minds, calm, ancient, familiar. "We remember your promise." The bridge fell silent. "What promise?" one of the officers whispered. The answer came in the form of images, visions of the first humans, the ones who built the entities, standing beneath alien suns. They had promised to return when they were ready to rebuild what was lost. The war, the chaos, the awakening, it had all been the final step in that promise being fulfilled. Humanity hadn't been chosen by chance. They were the continuation of a legacy millions of years old. The gate's pull grew stronger, drawing ships closer. The commander realized what it meant, a choice. Enter the gate and accept whatever waited on the other side, or destroy it and remain in the galaxy they knew. She looked at the crew, at the faces that had carried humanity through war and loss. "If this is what we were meant to find," she said softly, "then we can't turn back now." With a quiet nod, she gave the order. The human and Dominion fleets aligned, engines powering up one last time. As they moved toward the gate, the structures around Earth began to dissolve, releasing their energy into the sky. The planet glowed brighter than any sun, its oceans reflecting the gate's golden light. Every human who saw it knew they were witnessing history. Not an end, but a beginning. One by one, the ships crossed the threshold, vanishing into the brilliance. The gate pulsed once more, and then, as suddenly as it had formed, it collapsed, leaving nothing behind but silence and starlight. For weeks, Earth waited. No signal, no ships, just the memory of what had happened. Life continued, cautious and uncertain. And then, one night, a faint transmission reached the outer colonies. Scrambled, almost inaudible. Engineers worked tirelessly to decode it, until finally a voice came through. It was the commander. Her tone was calm, steady, but there was awe in her words. "We made it," she said. "It's not another galaxy, it's us. Older, waiting. They built a refuge, a mirror of what once was. They remembered everything. And now they're asking us to finish what they started." The signal ended there. On Earth, people looked to the skies again, not with fear this time, but with wonder. The galaxy had changed forever. The Dominion no longer existed as an empire, but as a partner in rebuilding. The entities had vanished back into their slumber, satisfied that the cycle had continued. And humanity had become something more. But the final twist came years later. Deep beneath the ruins of the first colony destroyed by the Dominion, archaeologists uncovered something strange, a fragment of metal identical to the technology found in the ancient gate. Embedded within it was an inscription, written in a language only recently translated. It read, "We are the echoes of tomorrow. We remember the ones who will return." The meaning was clear. The future humanity that went through the gate wasn't gone. They had already existed, long before this version of humanity was born. The cycle wasn't linear. It was endless. Humanity had always been both the beginning and the end, and as the stars shone quietly over the reborn colonies, one truth settled across every human mind. They were no longer just a species that had survived war. They were the keepers of a legacy that transcended time itself. The dragons hadn't just awakened. They had remembered what it meant to dream. Years passed after the gate had opened and the fleets had vanished into its light. Earth had grown quieter since then, as if the planet itself was resting after everything it had witnessed. The scars of the war with the Dominion had slowly begun to fade, replaced by something new, rebuilding, cooperation, and an understanding that the universe was far greater than anyone had ever imagined. The stars that once looked cold and distant now seemed closer, like old friends finally revealing their secrets. People still spoke of the day the sky turned gold. Some called it the Great Awakening, others the return of the dragons, but everyone agreed that it changed humanity forever. The war that had once defined them became only a chapter in a much older story, a story of rediscovery. The Dominion, broken and humbled, had reached out again, not with demands or fear, but with hope. Together with humans, they began rebuilding the shattered trade routes and restoring colonies abandoned during the conflict. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was quiet, but Earth's scientists never stopped watching the skies. The last transmission from the commander of the horizon had become something sacred, studied, decoded, replayed across every academy and research center. Her words, "It's not another galaxy. It's us, older, waiting," became the foundation for a new era of exploration. The Council, restructured into a coalition of both human and Dominion representatives, had formed the Stellar Archive Project, dedicated to uncovering what the Ancient Ones had left behind. One of the most unexpected results came from the study of the light, patterns that had once surged through Earth's crust. When researchers mapped them out, they found that the lines formed a complete network, a planetary memory grid. Each pulse contained fragments of genetic and technological data, including instructions for things humanity hadn't yet learned to build. It was like a message from their ancient selves, guiding them toward a future already written in their DNA. As the years went on, humanity began to change, not physically, but in spirit. There were no more colonies fighting for independence, no more species struggling for dominance. Every world now worked toward the same goal, understanding their place in the story that had begun long before any of them were born. The entities that had once terrified entire fleets were remembered not as monsters but as guardians, symbols of balance and memory. The Dominion, once ruthless in conquest, had transformed too. Their worlds were no longer filled with military pride or cold efficiency. They had found something in humanity that they had lost long ago: the ability to hope. Joint outposts began appearing near the edges of known space, where human scientists and Dominion engineers worked side by side. It was there, on one of those remote worlds, that something remarkable happened. A faint signal, steady, rhythmic, began broadcasting through subspace. It matched the same energy pattern that had once pulsed through Earth, but this time it wasn't coming from within the planet. It came from beyond the stars, far outside any mapped region. When decoded, the message was simple: "We are still here." No one knew whether it came from the lost fleet or the ancient humanity the commander had spoken of. Either way, it meant one thing: the story wasn't over. Humanity hadn't just rediscovered its past. It had found its future waiting. The Council debated for months whether to respond. Some feared it could awaken forces beyond their control again, while others believed it was the next step in the path they were destined to follow. In the end, a decision was made quietly, without announcements or grand declarations. A single ship, small but advanced, was constructed, a vessel meant not for war but for communication. It was called the Continuum. Its mission was simple: follow the signal and find where it led. Before launch, the captain of the Continuum stood before the crew and said something that would later be remembered across generations. "We're not searching for answers," he told them. "We're searching for understanding. Whatever waits for us out there, whether it's our past or our future, we'll face it as humans. Together." The ship departed in silence, slipping beyond the edge of known space. Weeks turned to months, then years, and the signal grew stronger. What they eventually found wasn't what anyone expected. Floating beyond the galaxy's edge was a structure so immense it dwarfed any planet. It wasn't mechanical or biological, but something in between. Alive in a way that couldn't be explained. Its surface glowed with the same golden light that had once covered Earth. As the Continuum approached, the readings showed something impossible. The energy signature matched human neural patterns. The ship's crew realized that this wasn't just a relic. It was a living archive, a record of everything humanity had ever been and ever would be. When they sent a probe closer, a faint voice came through the static. It was the commander of the Horizon. Her tone was calm, steady, exactly as it had been years before. "Welcome home," she said. The crew stood in silence. The gate, the entities, the Ancient Ones, everything finally made sense. Humanity hadn't been exploring the universe. It had been retracing its own footsteps through time. Every war, every discovery, every act of survival had been part of a larger design, one that led them back to where it all began. The commander's voice continued, softer now. "You've completed the cycle. Now remember why you began it." Then the signal faded, and the structure dimmed, returning to the quiet of the void. The continuum turned back toward the galaxy, carrying what they had learned, that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology or its weapons, but its ability to endure, to adapt, and to hope even when surrounded by darkness. When the crew returned home, they were met not as heroes but as symbols of what the human spirit could achieve. They brought with them data and images that reshaped how people saw their place in the stars. Earth once again became a beacon, not of dominance, but of remembrance and unity. Generations later, when children looked up at the night sky, they were taught the story of how humanity once awakened the sleeping dragons, how a single act of war had turned into the rediscovery of their own origin. But more importantly, they were told the truth that every explorer eventually learns, that the universe doesn't just hold mysteries to be solved, it holds reflections of who we are. In the quiet of a rebuilt world, one of the last surviving veterans of the old war stood by the ocean, watching the stars shimmer above. He had seen destruction and rebirth, loss and understanding. He knew that somewhere out there, beyond the light of the farthest stars, the ancestors, or perhaps the future selves, of humanity were still watching. He smiled faintly and whispered, "We didn't wake the dragons to fight them. We woke them to remember we were dragons too." As the tide rolled in and the stars glimmered brighter, Earth rested in peace, no longer a planet trembling under fear or war, but a world finally awake, ready for whatever came next. Humanity had completed one story only to begin another, carrying forward the same fire that had once made them feared across the stars, the fire of curiosity, courage, and hope. And as the last waves shimmered under the moonlight, the stars pulsed once, faintly, as if answering back.